Is your worm bin struggling? Are your worms looking a little unhappy? Chances are, you're making one of my 7 biggest worm bin mistakes and don't even know it. In this video, I'm revealing the most common pitfalls that can sabotage your composting efforts and, more importantly, how to fix them for a truly thriving worm system. Let me take you back to my early days of vermicomposting when I stood over a sad, smelly bin convinced I'd somehow managed to kill the most resilient creatures on Earth. My worms were sluggish, attempting desperate escapes up the sides, and the entire system reeked of anaerobic decay rather than earthy richness. I was ready to abandon the whole experiment until I realized that my failures weren't about lack of effort, but rather a series of well-intentioned mistakes that nearly every beginner makes. The good news is that once you understand these 7 critical errors, transforming your struggling bin into a black gold factory becomes remarkably straightforward. Mistake number 1. The feeding frenzy fiasco. The most devastating mistake I made was treating my worm bin like a garbage disposal, enthusiastically dumping massive amounts of kitchen scraps whenever I cleaned out the refrigerator. What I didn't understand is that worms can only consume approximately half their body weight in food per day. And a pound of worms needs time to work through their meals. When you overload the bin, uneaten food begins to rot anaerobically, creating toxic conditions that stress your worms and attract fruit flies, fungus gnats, and other unwanted visitors. The fermenting mess produces ammonia and other compounds that are essentially poison to your composting crew. Closely related to overfeeding is the moisture mayhem that follows when too much wet food overwhelms your bin's capacity to maintain proper drainage. I learned this lesson the hard way when I added several pounds of watermelon rinds and cucumber peels in one go, essentially creating a swamp where my worms struggled to breathe. Excess moisture displaces oxygen in the bedding, forcing worms to migrate toward the surface where they're exposed to light and temperature extremes. The solution lies in what I call the Goldilocks principle of feeding small amounts frequently, waiting until previous additions have been mostly consumed before adding more, and maintaining bedding moisture that feels like a wrung-out sponge when squeezed. My second major mistake was assuming that anything organic belonged in the worm bin, leading me to add citrus peels, onion scraps, and even leftover pizza with cheese still attached. Worms are remarkably sensitive to the limonene compounds in citrus fruits, which can irritate their skin and create overly acidic conditions in the bin. Onions and garlic contain similar irritating compounds, while meat, dairy, and greasy foods attract pests and create foul odors as they decompose. I watched my worms actively avoid entire sections of the bin where I'd buried orange peels, essentially rendering that space useless. Equally problematic was my bedding approach, initially using only shredded office paper because I thought more paper meant better absorption. However, finely shredded paper compacts quickly when wet, creating dense mats that prevent air circulation and make it difficult for worms to move through their environment. Quality bedding should provide both structure and carbon balance, combining materials like torn cardboard, coconut coir, aged leaves, and newspaper strips that maintain their form while absorbing moisture. This creates the fluffy, breathable environment where worms thrive, while providing the carbon necessary to balance nitrogen-rich food scraps. Mistake number 3. Neglecting aeration and pH balance. I initially treated my worm bin as a static container, never disturbing the contents because I feared stressing the worms. What I didn't realize is that gentle aeration is essential for maintaining the aerobic conditions that support healthy decomposition. Without periodic fluffing of the bedding using your hands or a small cultivator, the materials compact over time, creating oxygen-depleted zones where beneficial aerobic bacteria cannot survive. By understanding and avoiding these 7 mistakes, you're not just preventing problems but actively creating conditions where your worms can perform their composting magic at peak efficiency, ready to transform your worm bin into the black gold factory it was meant to be. Subscribe to the Living Soil Lab for more insights into building living soil systems, and share this guide with anyone struggling with their vermicomposting journey.